Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Dave Albert. In this show, I talk about technology, building a company as a CTO and co-founder, and have guests to discuss their roles in technology and entrepreneurship. Today, I'm joined by Alan Costell, our venture investment leader, or VIL, here at the NDRC. Medit. Thanks very much for joining me, Alan.
Pleasure.
So tell us the story of you.
So the short version of this that I often describe is I started off life as a scientist in the pharmaceutical sector. So I was playing around with some R&D in industry and academia, but I wanted to get closer to the commercial side of it. So joined pharmaceutical big global corporates in product marketing, product strategy, and product launch roles. Did an MBA along the way, and then set up my own consulting practice. And exactly like all good consultants, it's do as I say when I mentor someone, not as I do. So I set off without any plan, without any business plan, without any idea of what I was going to do, but just the idea that I wanted to do some stuff for myself, and let's explore where that led me. And I started working a lot with startups, multi-sectors startups, and trying to help them to move their technologies, engineering, products to international markets, working with enterprise agencies to do that as well. That was very enjoyable for a while, and I realized that the missing link in a startup moving a new product to international markets was funding. So I started getting involved with angel investors and VCs, and for about 10 years, I've been trying to operate in that trifecta of new products, commercialization, and the investment funding needed to do that. So that's what brought me to NDRC about 18 months ago,
so you just got here just before we did then?
Yeah, you were summer 17, May 17, so I probably joined April, May 17. So when I was telling you all the good stuff and the good stories, I was about half a step ahead of you in NDRC terms.
Just like any good teacher.
Sometimes that way, yeah. So I guess I was kind of rolling out of previous projects, so I was probably joining from about, February onwards, but fully and full on from April of that year. So that's kind of the story of me. The other element of what I do is I've always been heavily involved in the community, in the startup community. So I'm involved in an enterprise center in a voluntary role to try and help develop new startups and new entrepreneurial ecosystems near where I live. And I've always given that type of time and commitment to startups, to organizations, and even to some social enterprises, which is something that I'm quite interested in, both the enterprise side and the social side.
Very cool. So can you tell us a little bit about what the day-to-day of a VIL is? What are your responsibilities?
So I'll just paraphrase a conversation I had just yesterday with one of my colleagues, which is, it's a great job because you're never doing the same thing 2 days in a row. And that feels pretty interesting. So our role is a chunk of our time is spent trying to find great startups out in the ecosystem. So we meet so many startups at events, meetups, tech transfer events. Individuals come to us, and we're working with them for a week or a month, a year to develop that opportunity into an investable proposition for NDRC. Then companies come on the program, and we continue working with them. Generally speaking, if we find a really interesting prospect, we'll stay with that prospect all the way through the investment and through the program. And the role there is supporting that company to challenge some of the business ideas, the business strategies, the vision. It's probably mostly on the commercial side that we're pushing on with a reflection of the technology and the product that's been built. But as you know, it's about the commercial and it's about the customer first, and the technology probably follows afterwards in my terminology. Then after the program has finished, we continue working with those companies if they want us to, but we stay closely involved as they're developing out their seed investments. I guess when companies go far enough outside of the portfolio and they're on their C round or something like that, we're probably available if they need us, but where our roles probably go slightly shorter at that point. We also do a lot of work working with our partners, be that in maybe tech transfers in the third level sector or with other industry stakeholders. We give a lot of time to the ecosystem to help develop it. It's a rising tide that lifts all startups in Ireland.
Very interesting. So what was really surprising then? Because since I didn't know that you were so new to this, or at least the VIL role.
Yeah.
What was completely different than you expected coming into the role?
So, to a degree, the role was quite similar. What I would have done before is worked with a large number of startups, tried to help them to hone their business proposition, their business strategy, communicate that well to customers and to investors. So we do that here. We do that very well here. We probably do that at a slightly larger scale. So we invest in something between 40 and 50 startup companies in Ireland every year through the programs. So one of the really nice reasons to be here is that you're able to do what you love doing, but with a little bit more scale. So that was fairly fantastic. Also joining here, I would say this is going out on record, and all of the other colleagues are listening to your blog now. Thanks, Dave. But it's a fantastic team. So you're learning from other people. You're learning from colleagues. You're learning from the companies that we've invested in. So that's probably been a pretty rapid growth learn for me over the last 18 months as well, which is brilliant because that's just something that's going to drive you.
Yeah. So if a company were coming in trying to pitch to be accepted to an accelerator program like the NDRC, what sort of things do you wish they knew before coming in? What did we do wrong? I mean, obviously we got accepted, so we didn't do too much wrong, but what could we have done that would have made it so much easier to say yes? So
this is a pretty wide question. So let me brain dump at you for a little while, and then we can unpick it a little bit. The 9 Point Ventures, I think, recently brought out a framework that they look at when people are coming into them. They look at, they call it 5T, team, tech, TAM, which is their T for product, for market size, traction, and they call it trenches, which is their T for what kind of defensibility, IP, moat can you build around your business. That's pretty good. We're early stage. We don't expect you to score a 5 out of 5s on all of those things. The two most important factors for any simple assessment on the way in is around market size and team. Rockstar team in a tiny market is one thing. An unbelievably large and a needed market with a poor team or no team is going to be a challenge. The other thing that I personally place a lot of interest in is things like elements around traction or elements around insight. So insight is actually just relevant to the team. So if someone is coming in and dropping some really interesting insight, learning, observation about why a market ticks the way that it does, I'll place a lot of credibility in that. I know we're going to pivot. I know technologies are going to change. I know markets and market access and route to markets are going to change. So what I'm looking for is signals about how people review their markets, think about the way their businesses are going to be, and what early steps they've taken. Now, we'll go into that a little bit more detail, I'm sure. But what do I wish a startup would know before they came in to us? It's about customer validation before product build.
Yes.
And I know you've talked about this in recent podcasts as well, I think with Dermot and maybe some of your agile conversations as well. So if a startup comes in and says, I've built something really cool, I'm not saying your heart sinks, but you know that that's where the conversation is starting from. If a startup comes in, a team, insightful leaders come along and say, we've noticed something really interesting, really cool happening in this marketplace. We don't have the numbers right, but we think this is a big problem and we think we'll be able to solve it over here in this way. Well, then you're just going to have a conversation about the market. You're going to have you're going to enjoy the conversation with the founders. So that's pretty interesting. You got in. So that was around meeting you and Julie and just knowing that the market insights, the market depth was there. There was ideas around the product. You had probably the capability to build them, but we knew that you'd be able to adapt into the market as you get more and more insights. We didn't think that we had all the answers, and you didn't think you had all the answers, and Julia didn't think you had all the answers. So that was a pretty cool conversation to have, and it was I can put this on the record. It was a good, easy, relatively easy decision for that to happen.
Well, that's fantastic to hear. I would put one caveat on the I built something cool not being necessarily relevant. The only way that could be very relevant is if the thing I built validated my assumptions, as opposed to it's cool technology. Like, I've got people who want to use this, buy this. That sort of, even if it's a small effort to create something like that, to validate your idea, validate the problem.
For sure. And that's almost the next step, or the next, the level 2.0. If you're building something that is proving something, but there's a subtle difference there. If you're building something to prove assumptions, you're exactly following the right process. If you build something and it happens to show, you've still built first before going out there into testing into the market. But if you're looking for customer validations, one of the examples I used, and I'll bluff the numbers a little bit here, but while Tesla were 2 years before launching the 3 Series, or being able to, or the 3, before they were able to put it into production capability, they had like 20,000 pre-orders.
That validates an idea pretty well.
No, those guys can go build. That's fine.
No, that's the reason that I bring it up so often is because it's a mistake I've made a number of times. Building something before understanding exactly what was needed before really understanding the market, which is why this time it worked out so well, is because Julie was there to stop me from doing the wrong thing. She understood our users and our customers so well that even though we did build a prototype, it was more to understand it and to try to move it forward than it was, as I'd done in the past, go off into the developer hole for 2 or 3 months and come out with a product that was not really interesting to anyone.
So there's 2 points on this. One is that you guys came to us with a team with a really, really strong commercial focus, with a really, really strong technical focus. So, but you can imagine the position you would be in if you were on your own, or if Julie was on her own. Now, the other perspective I'll take on the build before test, or build before check in your market validations. And this is a very particular personal perspective. So I'm here in NDRC where, we invest in digital and technology startups, and I'm not a technologist. I'm not a software engineer. So I can't add pretty much any value to the technology build of a solution. But I have a naive sounding but correct perspective that it can get built.
Yeah.
So if we've proven enough of the market need, if we've proven enough of the market demand, if we understand the value that we're going to be creating in the market, we can build an app. We can build a back-end infrastructure. It'll be buggy as hell. It'll fall over if you sneeze at it, but then we can improve from there. Sure, it's different if you're going into a deep tech world. And then you have to be able to show some baseline scientific and engineering concepts that you can build before you can start theorizing. But for most cases, for most businesses that we see, it can get built.
Yeah.
So for instance, with Meta, whether it's going to be a communications app, whether it's going to be a library and archive, whether it's going to be a sharing, whether it's going to be a common learning platform, these things are being built. So we know it can be done. We had a lot of confidence that you would be able to put together a team that would do that. Then it has to get optimized. Then the UX has to get optimized, and you're still in that journey, of course. But it can get built.
Yes.
But why should we? There was always this perspective between the users and then the customers that you looked at with various different forms of doctors using it and various different forms of pharmaceutical companies wanting to get access to that in some way that we didn't fully elucidate back at the time, but we knew there was something there. That's the stage that we invest in.
Yeah, yeah, and when I said about building something cool that it proved your idea working, I don't mean technical. I mean that really one of the most important things I learned was to go talk to your customers, users. And if you've got some small prototype, if it's something built in Figma or Marvel or Balsamic or on paper, like I remember hearing about the Evernote, the people who built Evernote, and it was before they even had iPads, and the former CEO carried around a piece of cardboard the size of an iPad. So it's about making sure, creating something that will help you validate that there is a problem and people want it solved. That can be, discussions and interviews with your potential users or customers.
For sure. It's discussions, it's PowerPoint, it's concepts. I mean, you know that we wax lyrical about the mom test, for instance, where you're talking to people and you're asking them about their problems. The product is your business. Nobody cares how you're going to solve it for them. They just care about their problems and how important it is for them. So it's talking to them. It's talking to enough people, whether you're at an enterprise, whether a consumer, whether you're at a specific user, consumer user like you guys are doing, but talking to enough of them, taking back that insights, doing that innovation theater of post-it noting it up on a whiteboard and seeing the cluster. It always pops right out at you as to what the key nodes are that users are talking about as their problems, how important it is when they find out what those problems are. Then your job comes in. Okay, should we build to fix that? That's your next decision point.
Yeah, that's there was so much of what we learned in the first bit that I would have just loved to have known months before we started. Typical engineer, you hear a problem, your first instinct is to go solve it. Stop that. Is it really a problem?
I'm in a world of trouble, but my wife says that about men as well. So, let's not pull that string. It's admirable to want to try and solve something and to want to try and deploy some skills at it. But, bottom line, it's admirable, but in a startup world, you've got limited resources around time and financial capacity, and other needs around you. So you have to make sure that you're just choosing the right problem to solve.
Excellent. So what's something that, as people get started within an accelerator, that would be good to know before getting there? So are there any assumptions or mindsets that new ventures should have as they come in, other than an open mind?
Well, it is that. That's where my mind was going to as you were asking the question. A colleague calls it the fog. So as you go into an accelerator, we don't know the answers. We do know lots of the right questions. But we don't know the answers. And so we're going to fire a lot of options at you, a lot of questions at you. Any accelerator is going to do that to any startup. And suddenly it's going to open up lots and lots of opportunities. But that we're not saying you should do all of these things. We're asking all of these questions. We're opening up lots of the issues. And then it's your job to try and structure that and go find out, customer validate, what are the right problems, what are the right markets, what are the right segments, what are the right routes to market that we're going to try and do, what experiments can we do to try and improve this. So one of my colleagues calls it the fog, where you're suddenly besieged with a lot of information, even more questions, and it feels kind of hopeless and kind of scary. But in 18 months or a little over 18 months here, I've probably seen like 5 cohorts, and it's really starting to hit home to me. Just yesterday, we finished another group over in Galway, and the coalescing of the ideas and the communications and the narrative in the final couple of weeks, when people have done the work for the previous couple of months, is kind of consistent, and that ideas will pop out, form a plan of where you're going to go forward and what might become investable with later stage investors. So it's going to be stressful when you come into an accelerator. There'll be some fun, that's fine, but it's going to be stressful. You're going to have a lot of indecision, and you're going to have to be comfortable with that. You have to sit with some of that indecision as you're going out there and working with customers, potential customers.
Yeah. So of your ventures and those of your colleagues, is there anything that stands out as something that is an identifier of what indicates that they'll be more or less successful?
So that's an interesting question. Just the way you phrased it, my mind has kind of partitioned it into two questions.
Sure.
So let me come back. It relates a little bit to the entry point of an accelerator that you mentioned earlier on, and I thought we would go deeper on. So I'm a big believer in team first. Probably about half the investment world believes team first, and half the world believes in market size first. And the market size piece is something that's driven by venture capital economics, where you have to put a certain amount of money invested or deployed in order to generate the type of returns for the type of fund that you have. So market size is really, really important. That's not to say a business can't be wonderfully successful, generating $2 million a year and paying for its 4 or 5 staff. Brilliant. And 95% of businesses all around Europe are like that. So you're looking for something that makes it a little bit different. One is a market size, a big market size with a big problem. Someone's going to win. Fine. But the way you phrase your question made me think about the founders and what makes them different, what makes them stand out that might mark out a little bit of success. I suppose one factor might be the openness to that fog and getting through it. I really like insights into the marketplace, learnings from the marketplace. So maybe, is that a little bit related to vision? Is that a little bit related to that we're going to solve this big problem because this is the root cause of it? This is the real strong net effect in the marketplace for it. Oh, look, there's some big numbers attached to that as well. That's kind of cool. So, there's a vision piece around that. So I'm thinking of one of our other previous startups that has done very well. They've raised a seed round this year, and they spotted a market opportunity that was being driven by, I know, tens of millions of people being employed in the gig economy and doing multiple part-time pieces of work. So there was an insight to spot that change was happening. And then to think, well, what's actually the net effect underneath that? What's happening to all these guys who are doing 50 jobs a week or 10 jobs a week? What does that do as opposed to the paradigm of 20 years ago where you did your PAYE job for 40 years? So spotting that kind of insight is interesting to think about. So that comes back to founders. What they're going to have to execute. And a factor that I often talked about in execution is, I don't mind if you're starting with an absolute base idea on where we now, nearly the 1st of December. But I will judge how fast you move by the 7th of December and by the 21st of December. Then you can have a week off. And what are you going to do on the 1st of January? So I'll judge progress and traction quite impressively. If you're able to make a lot happen, okay, fine. Then we just need to check if you're making a lot happen in the right direction.
Okay. Yeah. No, the vision, that's a tricky one. And that seems like,
I'll give you an example that's a little bit related to what Meta are doing. I heard a speaker talking recently about how they're doing a new type of e-learning and deploying a new type of e-learning into developing markets. And he said, education hasn't changed in the 19th century. It's one guy standing at the front of a lecture room talking at 50 people in front of him who are writing in notebooks.
I hate that.
And it's going to change. I don't know how it's going to change. I don't know what factor, I don't know what tools are going to do. I don't know what e-learning, I don't know what MOOCs. There's all of it. I mean, learning education is going to be an enormous subject. But that kind of insight to say that essentially the structure of our learning hasn't changed since the 19th century. We think we can probably do that better. We've got these new technologies. We've got new modes of working. We've got new modes of thinking. We should probably be able to do that better. So this guy has a vision that he wants to change education for the developing world. He starts there and starts executing underneath that. That's okay. Fine. Let's back that. He's got about 10 million users.
No, I was going to say.
It's not a startup.
Yeah. Who are you talking about?
It's a company called Allison.com, who are based in Galway.
Oh.
And they're quite, maybe in my mind, I won't say it, I won't judge it on behalf of anyone else, but in my mind, they were a little bit unsung for the amount of work that they've been able to achieve already.
Yeah, no, I hadn't heard of that. I've heard of, the Khan Academy.
Yeah.
KHAN. And I watched a lot of their videos on the bus a number of years ago. Yeah. And I love the idea of it. It seems like such a waste to spend time with an actual mentor in a classroom talking at you and then going home and trying to have, as myself and my wife try to do, well, my wife does because I'm away too much with work and podcasting, trying to reteach kids how to do things with, tactical help where my kids might be a little too young, but watching a video beforehand on your own time at your own speed or over and over again, and then going and having assistance with doing the actual practical, that seems so much more obvious.
It's practical. So I guess that's a mode or a modality of teaching, and different people will go to it in different ways. If you go to the Khan Academy and look around at their ecosystem, you got your Coda Dojos, Khan Academy, you've got maths camps, maths clubs, engineering club, Python clubs, code clubs, Scratch clubs. They're all out there. We're actually reinventing the way we want our 8 to 12 to 15-year-olds. We're teaching them new skills in new ways to prepare them for a world that they're operating in. I don't blame the education system, but I think the education system takes 20 years to change. And I don't think it's caught up. So we've got all of these academies, that are teaching new skills in new ways to users that they're just moving faster. They're disrupting. It's admirable that they're doing it in a semi-voluntary, community-orientated way. I think education systems are going to have to catch up. I was working with a startup this week, and some of the numbers that are coming out that they're working with is something like 21 million software engineers in the world. That's a job that didn't exist to anything like that scale like 20 years ago. And we don't think that's going to get smaller.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I would love to see some major changes actually gain momentum in that area. But just seeing kids do homework, and that seems to be a giant waste of time, really. I know it was for me, but I'm a terrible student. So I was too busy off trying to build computers or write code to pay attention to school. But that's just me. Cause
I have, it's a good dinner table argument for me. Some of my extended family are teachers, and they believe in the education system, and we had a very good education system. We probably have the frameworks for a good education system still. But they still want to teach the kids times tables and teach them spellings and teach them A, B, C, D. But now the schools are teaching them A, B, K, D, and they're teaching them the letters as sounds. They're teaching them to work out problems by inductive reasoning or by using peer group reasoning rather than being taught didactically and by rote and learn by rote. And they driven mad. Change. It was good enough in our day. It was a good solution in those days. And then you see a 7-year-old coming home and being able to spell and speak large words and being able to work out problems and issues themselves. And you think, maybe there's something to this. It's going to work. I'm not close enough to the education system to see what the actual changes are going to be. But things are going to change. And you brought up the Khan Academy as an example. I'm a big fan of Coda Dojo when it was started by James Swelton in Cork. I remember I heard him speak a couple of years ago when they were going through one of their growth phases, and said, we started a coding club after school because I wanted to teach my peers how to code. Now we're in 30 countries and 5 continents, and there's 10,000 kids every Saturday morning learning how to code, and everyone stood up cheering. It was kind of a nice moment. He started off when he was, I guess, maybe 18, maybe he was 16. Great guy, great Irish tech entrepreneur. He's done a number of ventures since. He's worth keeping an eye on.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll definitely pay even more attention. I'm a big fan of what Coder Dojo do. Yeah. And if any of my kids show any interest, I will drag them along and do a bit of mentoring for the other students, because I don't think my kids would listen to me.
There is, it's not an oxymoron, but there is something, if they show interest, I'll drag them along. There's something, there's something going a bit wrong in our language there.
Well, if they show any interest, then they must go. I guess that's what I was aiming for there. But yes, you were correct. What do you think, to get back on startups, what do you think that oftentimes founders you see, or potentially even more importantly, the founders who don't make the cut, focus too much on? Is there anything specific, or they just don't focus enough on the right things?
It's another good question. It was something I was thinking about in a different context this morning. I think you've got to put yourself much more in your users or your customers' shoes. Anything else, you're building outwards as opposed to building from their perspective and building into that need. So you might get some people who are a little bit too hung up on the one business model that they had thought of. And it's hard to let go of ideas. It's hard to let go of concepts that once they've got embedded into you a little bit. That's one area. So, and I guess that's just related back to something we mentioned earlier on about not being open to change. So getting wedded on a particular business model, getting wedded on a particular technology or a particular stack, that's to their detriment, and it's actually stopping them from going out there and talking about it. And I think why I think that's quite interesting is that there's so much language around startups now. We're talking about doing all of this startup process. And I think people talk a lot about the process and actually just need to get down and do it. So thinking about people designing a sales process and a sales pipeline, and the conversions will be this, and if they're this, we'll change this lever, and if they're this with that lever. And I'm saying, have you gone out and talked to them? Let's think about a pipeline when you've got 2 customers. And I think Des Traynor from Intercom was talking about this at Web Summit. It's I guess you can put a link in the notes. It's been widely shared, where he talks about a traditional sales and marketing funnel going from market, opportunity, leads, proposition, sales, grant, and it kind of reads from left to right, if you can picture that. And he said, let's scrap that. Let's start right at the end, right at the right hand side, and let's think about our first 2 customers, our first 10 customers, and expand outwards from there. So inverting the traditional sales and marketing thinking. So I think some founders, if they don't make it, I think maybe they're a little bit wedded to one idea and they're not willing to change. And quite a lot, they're not putting themselves in the customer's user shoes. They're thinking about their startup process. I'm a founder. This is what I do. I'm an entrepreneur now. I've got to start thinking about a team. I've got to get funding. I've got to think about doing an accelerator. I've got to think about doing this kind of grant or this kind of competition. That's not what it's about. Go back to your customers. Win the competitions that are really matter and really relevant, but don't win the competitions that aren't relevant and stop you from going in front of your customers and stop you thinking about your customers. Yeah. Or users.
Yeah.
It's a good point to just always balance the difference between customer and user. And very often not the same, actually. Invariably not the same.
Yeah, I can't think of, I guess Netflix would be a customer user. There are a few, but quite often not. Yeah, that's a good point.
And that's an interesting example. If we just spin that idea, I pay for Google Drive. I'm a user and a customer at a personal level. I pay for Netflix. I pay for Spotify. I lasted about 20 minutes before I paid up for Spotify because it was so good. So maybe there's a consumer element of it where you can think about your user customer, but in so many other elements, in any B2B, in any B2 enterprise, B2G, your users aren't going to be your customers. There's always going to be a more complex customer conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was going to say something about solving problems.
Awkward silences.
That's all right. I guess it doesn't matter. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you about related to focus is you seem to be amazing at just cutting through the bullshit. Honestly, Julie's good at it too, but I don't know. How is it that you're so good at that? Is there something that you can do to help other people cut through their own bullshit and focus on the right things? Or is it just knowing that the right questions to ask from the outside?
There's a couple of perspectives on that. I think if I speak a lot of bullshit, I might recognize it coming from other people. Let me pre-say that one before somebody else does. There is an idea about staying outside of, or a little bit above, a little bit of a helicopter view, if you want to use that consultancy point of view. And I mentioned earlier on that I certainly don't know the answers. I never want to ever come across as if I have answers, but I do have lots of questions. And I sometimes talk about it. I'll keep asking stupid questions until easy answers stop coming back. And then you're kind of honing in on something. But from my perspective, I do know that I want to move a conversation on. So we can explore a fog. We can explore lots of questions about what our users are saying here, what customers are saying there, what a technology stack is giving you a problem for over here. But I know that I want us to move forward. So that's always going to be my perspective. I'm not going to get bogged down in the trenches as much. So I'm not going to be an operational guy. I'm always going to be looking at where we want the question to go and how we want that question to be forward. So that might be an element of cutting through some stuff. There's also an idea that you said the question, but I'm not acknowledging, by the way, that I am good at cutting through the bullshit. But there is an idea of kind of an asymmetry of roles. So is Medit your first startup, second startup?
It's the first one that has been my sole focus.
So this is your first one that's been your sole focus. In the last 5 years, I've probably worked with like 500 startups, and I'm always talking about commercialization, raising investment, validation from customers, validation of a business model that will get you to the next stages. So I've seen a lot of instances where I know where the question's trying to go, but from your perspective, you might have only seen one or two. Yes. So there's an asymmetry of information. I was thinking about this recently in a couple of contexts, dealing with some lawyers on a legal agreement that's like 80 pages long, full of legalese, translated via Martian, via a bad Google Translate. And they know what they're doing because they've done this like 10 times this week, and 10 times last week, and so on. You're scared, because you're looking at this document and you haven't read it before, and it looks horrible and looks scary, and you don't know what the heretofores and whereases and insomuches means. So there's an asymmetry of information, which in an accelerator, we're trying to impart those kind of questions. We're trying to impart those kind of patterns that we would have seen before to a startup that might not have experienced it. And if that works, I think that's pretty cool. I think that's pretty effective. And maybe someone might call that cutting through the bullshit.
I guess that probably is really it, is that because you know the right questions to ask, it focuses us as the ventures on the thing that we didn't realize that was what we needed to focus on. And that feels like removing all the things that aren't as important, because that gets to the core of it. So this is experience is one of the biggest bits of it.
Yeah. And you know, within the last 15 years, I've been involved in startups as well. So I have some perspectives on what it's like to be on the inside, and it's a cauldron. It's a crucible, of positivity when the customers are going well, of negativity when it's all going down in flames around you. And I have had some of those experiences. Haven't had hundreds, because like there's only 24 hours in the day. But it's about then trying to capture some of those experiences and the conversations you would have with hundreds of founders and lots of successful fundings and seed fundings and A-round fundings, and you're trying to distill and pick up little nuggets from a Des Traynor in Intercom, or Collison in Stripe, where his vision for the company is they want to change the GDP of the internet. So you're picking up these kind of little nuggets from people, and I do read quite widely around this subject, and you're just trying to distill some of these things back into a conversation that you're having and making it relevant for a founder at that time.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Wow. Just digesting. That's the hard bit, especially since I don't want to pause, because I want this to be real time.
Yeah, no, I guess you don't get to pause in real life, even though you do in a podcast. And I've heard you talking to other people over the last few weeks since I got turned on. Actually, I've only started listening to podcasts in the last 3 or 4 months, so I'm always good for getting a recommendation. But you often go into a pause when you're digesting something, and it's quite a personal situation that you're doing. You are a founder, you are a CTO. It is an early stage company, so people are talking about their experiences or giving bits of advice, and it's kind of very real time for you. You're not doing this retrospectively. You know, retrospective histories or retrospective strategies always seem to work out.
Yes,
but you're doing this in real time, so it's quite a personal thing you're putting out there into the podcast world.
Yeah, I mean, it's also very selfish. It's great to. When else in the whole time that we've been one of your ventures, we've not sat down and had like a full phones off, nobody walking around, nobody coming in, hour-long discussion.
Yeah,
I mean, we've had lots of good discussions, but not like this.
Yeah.
So I get to do this with you and other people. So I get a lot out of this, as well as the listeners, hopefully.
I don't think there's any doubt they are. They're getting up learnings from you, and they're getting to meet other interesting people, if not today. But it's okay to maybe just taking off a little tack there. It's okay to be a little bit selfish. You personally, but lots of other good founders work really, really hard. And their minds are consumed. Their headspace is consumed. So you got family as well, but, I've yet to beat you into the office and I'm an early bird. But you work hard and you need to have some downtime. You need to take some of your own headspace. I think that's maybe we didn't touch on that earlier on about good skills of founders. But I think you need to know when you need to take a break. And you need to take it, and you need to find some sort of outlets. And if this is going to be both learning and pushing out good content for you, well, then that's just a great outcome for the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like therapy. I mean, even when it's just me talking to the audience about something that's on my mind, it helps me. I hope that it helps someone, because I know that basically I try to focus everything on what I wish I'd heard on one of those startups that I did that didn't become anything because I went down into a hole for 7 or 8 months and built something nobody wanted, or tried to rebuild Amazon when really the goal was to get a customer. And what I needed to do was just throw a bunch of stuff up on Shopify and have an answer within a week of launching the shop, instead of, oh, well, I need to build a microservice-based system built with queuing so that I can, scale to a huge amount of teams.
But if you learned how to build a microservice system, then you got a positive out of that. So don't for anyone out there, learn from the past, fine, but don't build your whole framework about that. I wish I'd done this differently and I'll do it differently in the future. Build a framework to say, okay, I learned from that. This is what I'm going to apply. This is the positives. You got to be positive and optimistic when you're going forward, because you're competing all the time in the world, and you need to have something that's going to keep you going. Not false positives, but you need to have something that's going to keep you sane.
No, that's absolutely right. I mean, just cutting through the bullshit there. Like I said, it's because you can see the things that the people in the weeds can't always see, which is one of the best benefits of having mentors.
Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of having mentors. Even when I worked for myself, I built out a buddy system around me, and that ended up becoming a larger consulting firm where we work together. But having mentors in general, you're just learning from people. I don't have a whole lot of gray hair. If I stop learning, I'm learning from people that have had different experiences than me. I'm going to be in trouble. Apart from the fact that I enjoy learning new things, but it benefits me, and then I get to share that and pass it on to others as well. So I'm a big fan of mentors and finding personal ones, finding commercial ones as needs be, and something that I set up here this year in NDRC was a CTO meetup, where we're not talking so much about the commercial side of things, but it's a group of CTOs, chief data scientists coming together from a mixture of NDRC and non-NDRC companies. And one of the things that we set up in there was that someone will do a talk. Someone sitting right in front of me did one already. A 5-minute talk on a tech aspect. Fine, grand. But I specifically wanted to have a 5-minute talk every quarter on soft skills, human skills, hiring, how to deal with your crazy CEO, how to deal with the effect of moving from being a coder to being a CTO, where you're actually just managing coders, and it's a completely different skill set. So I wanted to have people talking about that and being able to peer mentor and peer review each other. So that's working out quite well.
No, I think it's fantastic. And definitely, I think there's a lot in the tech community that's not talked about enough about mental stability and mental growth. Yeah. Like the soft skills, many of us are mostly introverts, which doesn't mean we don't like to talk to people, but it may be harder for us to talk about how our team feels, how their day to day goes, how you feel yourself. And if you don't have, mental health and sanity and the ability to carry on, as you were talking about, taking some time off, or even if that's hours in a day taking those off. Because if you're not your best self, you're not doing anyone any good. You can keep working all the hours in the world, and your returns are just going to diminish to nothing.
Yeah, big fan of the law of diminishing returns. There's been a lot of talk. I think there's a little Twitter fight going on this week, centered around Elon Musk, as many Twitter fights do, where he's trying to suggest that, you come and work for Tesla, you're going to work 80 hours a week, 100 hours a week. Sometimes your best work comes when you're kind of semi-psychotic and only see things in blue, and you're on your 120th hour that week. And of course, the internet's piling in on him and saying, no, that's not right. There is one other perspective on this that I didn't mention around sort of my mentors and people that I learned from. And you mentioned it was around headspace and your mental health and so on. So my wife is a mental health practitioner. She's a psychotherapist. People have suggested I've been her client for the last 20 years, but yeah. There's just that. But I pick up a lot of concepts. I try to pick up a lot of concepts in learning from the way that she would counsel somebody or listen. So her particular brand of psychoanalytic psychotherapy is a lot about letting the person talk and then catching some of the dotted lines and connections between what they're saying.
I can see that so well now. So that really is your style, and it works very well.
So I try and pick up stuff from her. The other thing to do about some of that headspace stuff and breaking out of patterns that you get stuck in. You'll have seen it with ourselves, with Julie, or with some of the other guys around here that will go for coffee. And like, that's mentoring, but it's not, but it's going for coffee. Or one of the guys, poor sod, he has to go and take me running, every now and again, which I've fallen out of the habit of and I need to get back into. But we might go for running, or go run up to Phoenix Park from here, which is pretty cool to do at 7 a.m. And you're talking about enterprise sales to, somebody or other. And, it just breaks the mold a little bit. It makes you think a little bit differently. I mean, for the people on the podcast, Dave and I are sitting here with a table between us, and that's not a natural conversation point. You got a barrier going on between you. So sometimes break those molds. That's why stand-ups, that's why tech stand-ups and scrums work kind of well, because you're breaking out of getting away from the screen and shaking up the environment a little bit, which means that you're going to think about things a little bit differently.
Definitely. How did you build your network of mentors and buddies? How can other people do that? Any tips?
So there's probably two tips. It's a sales mode that maybe I got from my first career in commercial pharma. Good salespeople are going to get no a lot, and that's just bounces off them. So you've got to put it out there a lot in order to try and find those nuggets. That involves having a brass neck and just going and doing it. So one of the first startup projects I got involved in, a professor in Trinity had written an article, and it wasn't a scientific or engineering article. So we published it in maybe like a business and finance journal. And the article had vision, breadth, interesting concept around transport logistics in China and Europe and so on. And it blew my mind. And I went into Trinity, knocked on his door. He was a professor of physics in Trinity. And I said, I've read this article. It's really, really cool. Can I work with you? And he kind of looked at me a little bit funny and he went, okay. There's this other project that I'm involved in that turned out to be the Spirit of Ireland project, which was a big renewable energy project that we tried to develop for a couple of years with some successes and some fails. You got to put it out there. So when you're going out to somebody who has a lot more experience or a different type of profile, you've got to go in the door and saying, I'm here, this is what I can do, but this is what I'm looking to try and do for you. This is what I'm trying to bring a little bit of value to you. I think that conversation works quite well, but maybe it works 1 out of 5, maybe it works 1 out of 10 times that you do it. But if you do that 20 or 30 times, then you end up with 2 or 3 people who are rock stars in business or investment or engineering or in a corporate world. And then you kind of try and develop that relationship a little bit. You always try and offer something. Every relationship has to be two-way. You can't be take. So in everything you try and offer. And if the person is smart enough, they're going to see, well, he's not able to solve my large corporate problems right now, but maybe they're a good person. I'll keep an eye on it. And when there's a favor asked in 6 months or 2 years, maybe I'll remember this person. So you got to put it out there and you got to expect a lot of no's, but that's okay.
And be more specific would be another thing. Not just, can I pick your brain to busy people?
True. Can we just have 10 minutes to chat about this, or can I buy you a coffee? Yeah, you've got to offer something up a little bit more, first, because people's schedules are busy. LinkedIn is still a gold resource because, it allows people to check you out. So I send someone a LinkedIn invite, and in their own time, whenever they want to go into LinkedIn, they can go in and they can see my message, and that's kind of semi-interesting. With a click, they can see who I am. They can see who we've got some mutual connections with. If you're interested in that, I'm not so much. But I'll go into the profile. So this guy has chosen to write this kind of stuff about himself. Is he worth replying to? So it puts the control onto them. So you've got an interesting opening message. You've got a well-written profile that's interesting, and you're kind of making it worthwhile for them to engage with you. But yeah, you've got to do that a lot of times. So when I'm reaching out to people on LinkedIn, I have a process where I might be reaching out to 20 or 50 or 100 people on LinkedIn, and I'm tracking it, and I might see who the 5 or 10 people that responded to me are, and then I'm off on the next step.
So you've got your own CRM then?
Yeah, I've talked about this. I mean, I'm using a one page at the moment as a CRM tool, but when I'm doing an Excel search, it's like if I was searching for educators in med in Germany for you guys, I just pull it into Google Sheets, and I just have a process where I'm copy and pasting the LinkedIn profiles, the date, when we contacted them, what we did with them, when they responded, and keep it simple. Then when there's 5 or 6 important people that have responded to me and engaged with me, spin them into one page.
Nice. That's really cool. Yeah, I've got a Trello sheet of mostly people I've reached out to or am reaching out to to be guests on the podcast.
Be warned. When you get an email from Dave.
I'm coming for you all.
This is what's coming.
Is there anything else that we haven't covered that you want people to know?
There was one area that I was going to mention earlier on, and we kind of got sidelined into, I think, psychotherapy, but maybe it relates to the cutting through the bullshit bit, that if you're thinking about a business or a project, think of it in a layer. I'm trying to describe this to a podcast, to an audio podcast, but think about putting a layer in it, and underneath the line, there's stuff. Activity. It's like we've got to build out that feature, or we're going to migrate it from Azure to AWS because whatever, or we're going to hire that salesperson, or we're going to optimize the CAC. I call that the stuff layer. It's going to happen. It's lots of busy work. That's fine. But above the line is the strategy, is the vision, is the reason. So all of this stuff has to marry up into doing something, and that's maybe relating to cutting through some things, so cutting through some of the fog. So there's always going to be lots of activity happening, but just think about how that maps forward into what is strategic, what is value creating for the business, for the customers, for the users, as we've discussed. And it's kind of a filter to maybe prioritize and deprioritize, which is always handy. Good strategy. I heard a line recently, a while back, that I've been using for a while, that you don't have a strategy until you're saying no to things. And that's quite good. I don't normally like doing things by negatives or doing things by exception, but it's quite nice to think that I'm only doing things that I need to be doing, and I need to say no to things, and then I've got some priority, and then I'm going to be moving some stuff forward. So I use that little measure of above the line, below the line. Below the line, there's it's like a swan swimming. The legs are flying furiously, but above the line, the swan's looking around at where they're going, and that's kind of an interesting way to save yourself some time.
That's the strategy until you say no. That I thought of this like 3 times since we've been talking about the addition by subtraction.
Yeah.
So that has popped into my head like 3 or 4 times as we've been talking.
I don't know. I'm stretching it, but my mind instantly went there to Stripe publish 14 lines of code, and you're there. VIL, an NDRC company, publish 11 lines of code. I think I think Connell has put it in a tweet. Nice. And so, how much are you letting go of? How much are you saying no to? Of course you can build more code. Of course you can write more lines. That's fine. But what's the bare minimum you need to do in order to make your strategy step forward? Pitch yesterday from one of our companies was talking about 2 lines of HTML, and our whole system is onboarded into you, and that was changing the way enterprise was looking at the financial enterprise system was looking at business. So did you call it admission by subtraction?
Addition
by subtraction. you don't have a strategy until you're saying no to some stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's what's interesting is that next week we have our team over for a team meeting because we have some remote workers, and one of the things I made sure that we have on our agenda is to discuss what to remove from Medit. I mean, I know it's early, and the answer might be nothing, but I want to make sure that at least every quarter, every 6 months, something like that, all right, do we still need this? Do we still need that? Is this still right? So not just continue adding bells and whistles, but cut out anything that's not valuable. So just, maybe that's why the addition by subtraction popped into my head so often there.
I think that's an interesting exercise. It may be nothing. You've only been writing the code for a couple of years and you're just rolling it out into market. There may be nothing to subtract. But if you're looking at your business from a commercial founder's point of view, and you and Julie are both commercial and technical, but if you're looking from a commercial point of view, what should we be putting out there? Are we still doing that Facebook campaign even though we've actually moved on, or we've pivoted our business model? Are we still nurturing that relationship even though we've realized that they're not going to be a strategic partner, but we're still going to his conference and we're still meeting up with them every 3 months for coffee? And okay, what can you omit from either a commercial or technical point of view? That seems like a good exercise to do.
Yeah, definitely. No, there are probably quite a few things that, with the team in our processes, I'm always asking at each stand-up, or not each stand-up, but at each weekly team meeting, is there anything we can do better? Is there anything we can stop doing? But this is the first time we've really done it about the product. So I'm looking forward to see if there is anything. I don't think there is, but a team together can think of a lot more than I can on my own.
Yeah. Okay. And doing that, and I know you already have this, but in an environment where people can chip up and say, well, why do we still have that? Or we're still looking at this legacy piece over here. So creating an environment where people can do that is pretty important as well. And you have that. It's not a command and dictate vibe that you have going on, I don't think.
No, not at all. You're
hiding it well.
If anybody thinks they have all the answers, then I don't want to be with them anywhere near them, That's the one thing I know is that I know nothing.
That might be a little harsh, but start from there and take on. There might be a little more going on than that.
Is there anything, any call to action you have for people? Anything that you want them to do related to accelerators or NDRC or?
Yeah, that's a nice opportunity. I guess it's not exactly a corporate plug, but a call to action is that we do have open calls for our programs next year. We just announced yesterday that our next Galway cohort will be starting in the spring, and that application form is live. We have an application open at the moment for our Dublin program, which will start again approximately in the spring. It's going to be a busy first half of the year. So if you have an idea, if you are already a startup, as you consider yourself to be, come and talk to us. Application forms are fine, but come and talk to us. Reach out for a coffee, reach out for a call. We'll try and help you anyway, even if you're not right or we're not right for you. So come and talk to us if you're a startup. And I think that's probably the main shout out. Oh, the other one would be that we're always looking for people to support us. If you're a mentor, if you want to get involved with startups and help them and advise them. Someone introduced me this morning to a guy who's looking to get involved in a particular sector, and we're going to connect him to do that, because that's just, it's a little bit of paying it forward. It's a little bit of helping everybody in the system. That works well. So be in touch. Otherwise we can't mutually help.
Yeah. And that's not just technical people or CEOs. Yeah. I mean, we had people related to PR and marketing and design and, I can't even think of some of them right off the top of my head, but
the mentors who have finance and corporate finance and business modeling and yeah.
And I think psychology might be a useful one.
Yeah, that's something we've looked at and we will consider again. Is that idea of resilience? I've looked at that before and worked with a couple of psychologists working with startups and that help people to understand the fog. One of the things is that you'll get in an accelerator, you'll get lots of mentors throwing lots of opinions at you, and part of your job as a founder is to distill that and decide which ones you're going to go with and which ones you might not go with, knowing that there's lots of this good advice coming at you. But yeah, we've looked at psychology and resilience as a skill set, because there are great days. And when you go and close that first sale, you're going to go and bring the team out for a beer or a glass of wine. That's fine. there's a lot of crap days. There's a lot of days when the funding round doesn't close or the customer doesn't close because you were embedding a lot more hope into it because you needed it more than they needed you. So there's a lot of tough days. So one of the benefits of an accelerator is that cohort that's around you, that there's a little bit of peer support, a little bit of mutuals, pickups, as well as advice on areas that you need to circumvent a technical problem or something like that. So that's probably the shout out. We have open calls for our regional programs, our Dublin programs. And if you're interested in getting involved with startups, we're always happy to chat and see if we can channel that.
And I'll put it in the show notes, but where should people try to reach out to you? Where's the best way to contact you?
NDRC.IE's got an info at. That's going to get you some application forms and put you into the system. But like, we're all pretty open, as we have to be. So come find us on LinkedIn and Twitter. You get me at Alan J. Costell on all the usual social networks and pigeons.
Thanks very much for joining me.
Thanks very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Really appreciate it. This was very useful and very informative. And thank you all for listening. Until next time, remember, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.